Greetings, everyone. Hello, this is AI Files, and I'm your co host, Shadab Hussain. I'm the Director of Data and AI at Microsoft, and this podcast is your window into the world of AI every week. To make it real, you will hear a lot of news and launches, and everywhere you can find a lot of those content in other podcasts as well. But what we do differently is we make it real for you so that you can understand how does that impact in your job and enterprise. We try to find the connection between all those AI happenings and the corporate world. That's where our focus is generally.
And I'm
And
the other half of bringing that focus to you. I'm Jamie Basilico, your co-host of the AI Files. I bring lots of experience, having worked with many different companies over my 35 years in this data-related AI field. And as I always say, please note that this is not an official Microsoft channel. The views and opinions expressed by myself and Shadab are our own and do not represent the views of Microsoft. So with that, Shadab, I know we've got a lot to cover like we normally do. So you want to get started with some quote of the week? I guess Microsoft CEO made some waves with a recent podcast that he did focused on things like AGI.
yeah, there's a podcast out there actually. It's called Dwarkesh Podcast, and Dwarkesh Patel is actually he's pretty young. He's a host, but he goes into the long form interviews and pretty good content. Definitely worth it. It's more like on the format of Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan. So a pretty good podcast, and it was a good 1.5 hour. More than that, Satya sat with him and talked about various things, and it's getting quite a bit of traction. Some of the things that actually really stood out, he talked about various things like Majorana chip and other breakthroughs, which we will talk about later in the episode. But some of the quotes that really stood out is like he talked about the knowledge work and there's a knowledge worker, right? So because there was a question about, okay, what's going to happen? What will AI do to all these process and the work in the enterprise, and how will that automate and or augment? So he talked about, look, there is a knowledge work and there is a knowledge worker. Knowledge work could be a more like process specific, right? I mean, like a task that need to be done. But then all these like hundreds of tasks ultimately need to be aggregated, right? So that's what I'm paraphrasing. Essentially, what he referred to is a connection between the knowledge work and knowledge worker. AI will do the knowledge work really well, but then this whole orchestration and aggregation of all those knowledge works that will need to happen, which is where you will require a knowledge worker. And he kind of alluded to say that knowledge worker is what that human is, but that could also be AI in some of the cases, right? So that's how he sees this connection, and I would say the way it refers to is more like an augmentation or collaboration between the AI and the human. Um, and some of the other things also stood out from that conversation. Like for example, he talked about intelligence is a log of compute, right? So he was really emphasizing on that why the compute is still so important after all that hullabaloo from the DeepSeek. The compute remains still the currency of AI. And intelligence is really the function of how much compute you can actually put to it. So he still believes in it, and that's why they're investing in it. He also talked about how he works himself with AI. He says that, uh, quoting him, I think with AI and collaborate with humans, unquote, right? So these are some of the quotes that stood out from this trendy podcast that happened with Satya Nadella. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds. I did listen to a part of that podcast. I would highly recommend anybody who has some extra time to listen to it. It's a little over an hour long, but some really good insights from Satya in that podcast, and his thoughts around AGI and how to measure it. Slightly different than how we're thinking about AGI today.
Yeah, and while he was talking, world kept happening, a lot of different news. So let's dive in and let's cover those news quickly. So let's start with human AI pin, right? We all heard about it. There was a famous TED video about it. Unfortunately, humans AI pin is dead. The HP is actually buying the asset. It's kind of like the active hire trend, where they're actually buying it but killing the product. but they really are acquiring the talent from that company, and some of the assets. Like for example, they have a Cosmos AI operating system that would be actually used, and like some of the other HP's products. But other things they will just shut it down, including the Human AI pin. There are some people who have been let go, and while the others will be retained and absorbed within the HP is interested in using some of those embedded AI kind of capability, and that's why they're acquiring it. They have acquired it for about $116 million. Unfortunately, for people who recently bought Human AI pin, like if they bought it in the last 3 months, they would still get a refund, but before that, there is no refund.
Yeah, it became a very expensive paperweight, in my opinion. It was plagued with problems from the beginning in terms of working, not only from a hardware perspective, but also some security considerations as well. So I don't think this is a dead space, by the way. I think it'll take time, maybe a different player. If you look at the Meta um, Ray-Ban glasses, those are really popular. So it's not like this space isn't going forward. I just don't think the pin was the right form factor, or at least not at this point in time. But we'll watch the space for sure.
True.
Yep. Speaking about I'll call it. It's not necessarily a robot when we talk about the Humane Pin, but Figure made some news. And again, remember, Figure is a company that's building robots and tied in with AI. So they introduced a new model called Helix, which is a vision language action model, and this is actually supposed to allow these robots to process and visualize language commands much better in real time. So the intent here is that these models can work with things that they've never encountered before, which is important because on a robot, quote unquote, that would be doing things, it should be able to understand and adapt to the environment, be able to react um, and act upon commands that it may have not seen objects that would relate to those commands. And it's doing that through natural language prompt. So what's interesting to me on this one is that typically when we think about robots, we think about manufacturing floors or plant floors. The intent with Figure, at least the way that they're looking at Helix, is to prioritize the home environment. Yes, this is like the Jetsons having, Rosie the robot in your house. So, this the intent of that brings up many different challenges, different than a manufacturing floor, because on a robot, the manufacturing element will be continuous repeating a particular process, but in the home environment, there's many different scenarios that could crop up. So the intent of this operating or this model is to make the robot more capable of doing behaviors that would be similar for what would be seen in various different household tasks. And that's the real key here in terms of the challenge. It's the training for teaching these robots behaviors that aligns with human effort, and that's something that we learn over you could say over their first 5 years of life, over the first 10, 20 years. My wife would probably say I'm still starting to learn things after 55 years, but that's the challenge in these humanoid based robots, and this model sets out to do that. The other thing that is, I guess, maybe important from Figure is that this is a really good way of recruiting additional talent into the company. So, if you've got this new VLA model and, focusing on home environments, that might spur on additional interest from, researchers, developers to actually work within the company to, build that next generation robot.
Hmm. Okay, talking about robot. In other news, Mira Murati, announces new startup, Thinking Machines Lab. Now, I don't know if it is about the robots or what would be, but I think the startup is actually focusing on the human AI collaboration and the maintaining high standards for AI safety. Most people know Mira Murati was actually chief technological officer at the OpenAI, and she recently left about a few months ago. and she has started assemble team, a lot of talent from the OpenAI, Anthropic. That's kind of a circle. Anthropic itself is kind of a circle carved out of OpenAI, and she has been hiring, right? So looks like she has some plans now and some direction in which they're going. But one of the things that I will also say is that in my observation, it's really really hard to build the new businesses, and particularly you need to really have that savvy business mindset. You talk about whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Apple, Meta, OpenAI. It was not just about the technological breakthrough, which is important. A lot of people have that talent, but it was also the savvy business mindset. Steve Jobs was really actually a lot more product and the business person than compared to just a technical mind, because that's important, right? I mean, you may have something really great, but if you're not able to survive all these financial challenges and getting the capital and shaping the product and finding the right niche, it's really difficult. No wonder 8 out of 10 startups fail. So it's very important. I hope Meera Murati herself has a lot of that business savviness, or she get somebody as a partner who has that kind of business side. Sam Altman is really, in my view, the savior of the OpenAI, honestly, even though he's not as technical and sharp as Ilya or others at OpenAI, honestly. But OpenAI needed Sam Altman, and that's why it has survived.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where the Thinking Machines lab goes. If you really read the press announcements from Mira Murati, it sounds like there are a lot of good jargon, but it's kind of hard to wrap around what is the actual product or process. They raised money and they obviously have top talent that was brought in from the various different companies, whether it's Meta, OpenAI, or Anthropic. But I'm not really quite sure what they're going to be building yet, but I will definitely leave it to them that I'm sure that they are building something. I don't know if it's a new foundational model. I don't know if it's processes, but when you get enough brain power behind something, I'm sure something good will come out of it.
Yeah, hopefully so. In other news, Jimmy, Meta has announced LlamaCon, its first generative AI developer conference, and it's going to take place on April 29th. Of course, it will focus all around the Llama world, and I think they feel that there is enough that they have to offer, and that's why they need require annual conference specifically on the Gen AI. I think Meta does. I think they do have a lot of offering, and it could become a good forum for them to develop, because I think they are also looking to develop a following around their models, and I think they want this to become more popular in the enterprise space as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think whenever you get conferences that drives, um, you know, it, it speaks to adoption that's out there and it drives additional adoption. So be curious to see how this first one actually goes off. Speaking of adoption, real quick in the news, OpenAI hit a milestone, which is 400 million users of their platform every week. So they were just 2 months ago in December, they were at 300 million. So they increased an additional 100 million users, weekly active users, that is. And also the number of paying users has doubled since September of 2024, reaching now 2 million people. So you've got additional adoption curve, additional people paying for it. And the other thing too is they've also noted a increase, literally a doubling of developer traffic. So these are individuals or companies that are using the APIs that it's doubled in the last 6 months. So there's definitely a trajectory up in terms of the usage of OpenAI from the various different ways that people can interact with the platform.
Sometimes, Jamie, I wonder that this open AI is such a phenomenon, right? I mean, when they formed together, it was such a powerhouse of talent that continued to deliver, change the world, really. And not just that, it has actually spun off in so many different companies, right? We just talked about Thinking Machine. Anthropic itself was carved out of OpenAI. And then not to forget Ilya, right? So Ilya is still around. He has his safe super intelligence. absolutely no product out there, but just because of his talent, he has now he's trying to actually raise more than $1 billion at a $30 billion valuation. Zero product, okay, and nobody knows when it will come out, but people are willing to actually put money on him. He is really the technical genius, and he was one of the main force in the OpenAI as well. It just, sometimes I'm amazed the kind of talent they all came together several years ago and formed the OpenAI. They all continue to deliver. They all have, most of them have gone into separate paths, but they all continue to make it shine. Okay. In another news, a study reveals that AI models may cheat when facing losses. So there was a study by Palisade Research. It found that advanced AI models like OpenAI's O1 Preview and the DeepSeek R1, they actually sometimes resort to cheating when they anticipate losing in games like chess. So these models, like they can be doing hacking opponents or altering game setups to secure a win. Well, I'm not surprised, to be honest. They are trained on the content and all that they have read. Humans are creative. Humans are also, that creativity can also manifest sometime illicitly. It can become cheating. So if they're
Yeah.
changing that, they're just our reflection, and if they're thinking in that direction, what I don't know is it because of the training of the data, how they have read about all these things, how they have seen these kind of things, or is it really a special intelligence that they are developing a new dimension which they were not trained on, but they're able to do all these kind of manipulation. The latter one is, of course, more scary. The first one is, in my view, obvious.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it's trained to cheat because that's what humans do, and it learns it based upon its training process. Like you said, it would be a little bit more concerning if it's like, oh, I'm going to lose, so I need to cheat now, and let me figure out how to do that. That's where, that might be the benchmark on, determining what is AGI, because that's a very um, very characteristic human trait in terms of wanting to come up on top. But yeah, we'll see where that goes. But it does remind me, and I'm very reminiscent of what people do. Um, so anyway, talking. Let's another quick hit news here. It seems like every time you turn around, there's a new tool that's being introduced, and this is no different. Mistral actually put out its Chat GPT user interface called LeChat. So it's reached 1 million downloads within 14 days, and it hit the top spot in France to become the top free download in the iOS App Store. Um, and even President Emmanuel Macron actually endorsed LeChat on a TV interview, within the last couple of weeks. So it's just interesting to see how, number one, different markets, different areas are, leveraging these different tools. And we saw, you can even take a little nod to DeepSeek earlier in the month in terms of its application that, ran rampant in terms of downloads and use. Obviously, it curtailed a little bit with some security concerns, but very similar, not on the security side, but at least with Mistral and their AI assistant, LeChat. Another quick thing in the news is I find this one interesting. So, the New York Times is incorporating artificial intelligence into its newsroom operations, basically introducing a tool called Echo to help assist in summarizing articles and various different briefings that are written by the New York Times. So, there's guidelines, obviously, from the editorial board for using this tool. It's really about suggesting edits, generating summaries, kind of building up promotional content, and being able to do SEO headlines or search engine optimization, all while ensuring that the journalist is actually part of that loop and ensuring that there's verified information. What I find somewhat interesting is really the timing of this, or interaction between timing, because there's still a lot of legal disputes between companies and OpenAI and Microsoft. There's a ongoing litigation or ongoing lawsuit about alleged unauthorized use of the New York Times content as it relates to training the various different foundational models. But again, interesting turn of the tides, if you will, in terms of using these tools. In my opinion, it's inevitable. that we'll see more and more, whether it's New York Times or anywhere else, using and leveraging AI-based tools.
Yeah, and to be honest, I do work actually with the media industry, and it is really being adopted, and particularly in the newsroom and several other places, we do see that adoption happening. So, um, not I would say not something extraordinary. Media industry is one at the forefront, in fact, trying out AI for different purposes. All right, let's move on to the launch section. There are a couple of launches that we can talk about this week, starting with Mistral Saba. So, Mistral Saba is actually a new custom trained model, of course, from Mistral, and it is designed to address a specific geography, which is basically Arabic speaking countries. So, Middle East, right? The goal for Mistral Saba is to excel in the Arabic interaction. Now, when they train them, and of course, and this is important, right? So Mistral has been more into the open space, but they have closed off late a little bit. They're trying to figure out how to make money, and they've realized that it's really hard to compete in the States. So they're trying to pivot more towards the Europe, and you can in the launches and the alignment. They're trying to get the government support from the France as well, and they're successful in that regard. They're also realized, I think, that EMEA as a geography is probably more suitable for them, and you can see that alignment. That's why they're launching this model specifically for the Arabic language country. Now, what they also found is because of the cross contamination or cross pollination between the Middle Eastern and the South Asia, there are lots of languages which are actually heavily influenced by the Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and other languages. They figured that actually it really works well with the other Indian origin languages as well, like the Malayalam and Tamil. Malayalam and Tamil are actually very rooted in the Indian language, which comes from the Sanskrit. But still, there is quite a bit of pollination between the Arabic and Sanskrit, and that's why I think they found this interesting connection, and I found that that was interesting insight.
Interesting, definitely, for sure. Speaking of something that is also interesting, Grok made some waves this past week. Specifically, XAI introduced a new model called Grok-3. So what's interesting about this is that it is various different foundational models being introduced, but it can analyze images, respond to questions, and obviously it's based upon data that's within the social network X, formerly known as Twitter. So what's very interesting about this is it's leveraging the new data center that Elon Musk and XAI put together. This is the one that has 200,000 GPUs to train this latest model. So in a post recently on X by Musk, he noted that Grok 3 was developed with 10 times, give or take, the computing power of its predecessor, which was Grok 2. And it expanded its use of data sets to do the actual training. So obviously, again, leveraging all the data that's on X and everything else. So what's actually in Grok 3? So it's actually two new models within the Grok 3 family. There's not only is there Grok 3 and Grok 3 Mini, but then there's also a reasoning component. So this is definitely the way of the future. If you haven't realized already, between O3, Google has its reasoning model. Obviously, we've seen the Chinese company DeepSeek with R1 and their reasoning model. So no different here for Grok. So they come in two different flavors: the Grok 3 reasoning and the Grok 3 Mini reasoning. Of note, the reasoning models are still being trained. They kind of released the beta of that. I'll do a quick little demo in a second. But what's interesting here is that XAI claims that the Grok 3 reasoning model surpasses the best versions that are out there currently today from OpenAI, that being the O3 Mini model. And it actually scored higher on various different benchmarks, those being like the AIME 2025 benchmark. And there's also other benchmarks in terms of just usability, some of those blind, quote unquote, model tests. So the Grok 3 Mini model, again, it's really meant to be a quick model. to answer, obviously answer questions. So this is smaller model, priced cheaper, but there's things to note that not all of the features from these models are actually out yet. There's the concept of having interactive voice with these models, not available yet. So these would be coming to both the Grok-3 and Grok-3 Mini. So as I just mentioned, the voice mode will be coming soon. Also, the other thing too is these models, they're not available on the API yet, but they will be available soon with the API. There's a couple of other interesting things that were noted with this, or at least with the announcement of Grok-3. And to me, it's about the open source side of it. So what Elon Musk had mentioned is whatever the previous version, after a couple months after a model's been released, Elon Musk plans to make the previous version open source. So what that means, let's say 3 months or so after Grok-3 is out there available from an API, Grok-2 will be made available open source. So again, that will drive shareability, as well as then theoretically drive price down, because things are open source and you can run it the way that you want to. For today, the highest level, or the beta version of the Reasoner, is really only available to subscribers of the premium tier, which is $50 a month, and they'll be the first ones to get Grok-3 and some of the other features that are, quote unquote, gated behind these plans, and that's been touted as Super Grok. So we'll see how that transpires. Now, what I can tell you is some things have been released, and let me just share my screen. I'll just run through a couple of quick things with you, and you can see at least some of the things that I have been working with. So, so this is Grok-3. This is their landing page. You can scroll through this. We'll have this in the show notes. But what I wanted to bring you to is some of the comparisons. So I mentioned this AIME, and they look at where does this fit. So they're comparing against things like DeepSeek or Gemini 2.0 flash thinking, as well as in the O1 and O3 models. And obviously they're touting this as being better than any of those other products and services that are out there today from the other ones. There's a couple of other things you can read on this one, but again, I bring it down to these other benchmarks, whether or not it's the AIME, and this is the 24 version, or the MMLU Pro. Again, this touts higher scores than something like a GPT-4o model, which is not a reasoning model, or these other models as well. So proof is in the pudding, right? So you got to test these things out. So you can hit this today. So if you just go to X and then hit Grok, you can actually work with this, and you can see it comes up automatically with Grok-3 and beta. Now, there are things that are here. So I could switch into deep search. We're not talking about this today, but there's deep research from OpenAI, deep research from Google. Perplexity actually just came out with a deep research tool as well over the last week. Grok is no different. So there's a deep search capability. There's also thinking. So they're slightly different. The deep search is going to be more of that formulation and coming up with many different sources to come up with more of like a research analysis. The thinking is more of your traditional reasoning thought process. And then, you could either toggle these things on or off. All right. So I did do a quick prompt, and if you had followed along when we did our DeepSeek episode, that I used a reasoning quote unquote prompt for terraforming Mars. So I used the same prompt that I did for the O3 Mini High, as well as the DeepSeek, and this is the output. It thought for about 28 seconds. I will tell you that when it was going through its thought process, it actually showed the reasoning, but when it's done, it removes that reasoning. I don't necessarily like that. I'd like to see how it thought and came up with it. I did look and compare like the answers. It was, pretty good. I still think the O3 mini model is the best. I actually think DeepSeek came out a little bit better as well in terms of the answer. But again, you're kind of shielded from the reasoning that this thing does. But overall, again, this is the non-paid. I'm on the free, so you could actually hit some of the stuff now in a limited fashion. So you could try it out as well.
Yeah, I think as far as the Grok is concerned, I don't think that they will be able to get a lead over other models. I think that at best they will try to catch up. Right, they're behind. Even though Elon Musk has thrown a lot of compute, right there, he has done some amazing things as far as the infrastructure is concerned. So I think the catching up is pretty fast. Actually, that's impressive, but I don't think that they are still having the lead. Plus, I think their end game is. I'm not sure if their end game is enterprise. I think they have enough on their own, like X, etc., as a user base of these models. Unlike Llama, I think Llama has found some footing within the enterprise as well, other than what they're using within the Meta's family of all the apps, etc. So I think the Grok kind of is on the line of Llama, but I think Llama is much more widely respected as well as adopted.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay,
Okay.
let's talk about something more now. This time from the Microsoft family, right? So there was a lot of chatter about the quantum computing breakthrough that Microsoft announced, which was actually Majorana-1. This is the world's first quantum chip powered by a new topological core architecture. So, quantum computing is really a computing which is based on qubits. Qubits are like bits, in the classical computing we have the bits which actually allows the values like 1 or 0 essentially holding the charge, right? That's how we calculate, and that allows a bits, and that's how the information is stored and the process. That is what the classical computing is. What quantum computing does is it actually has something called qubits. Qubits are like, again, bits, but they are more analogous, right? So they can actually hold not just the 1 and 0 representation, but they can also actually hold in between. Now that allows a lot more, and there are other properties as well, right? I mean, how they can actually interact with the other qubits, etc., influence them. That actually allows a lot more information to be stored and processed in a really, really rapid time. That's what is quantum computing in a very, very quick nutshell. Now, it is hard because attaining those kind of states in the matter to hold that analogous kind of values and processing them and creating that kind of inter influence between those qubits is hard. There are multiple approaches for that. I think sometimes you go with the charge on the ions, sometimes you go with different other properties. There are multiple ways of doing that, and that's what the companies are doing. Google has had a lead. They actually did some remarkable thing with the Sycamore chips, etc., many years ago. IBM also swung into action. IBM also has, there are many other companies also. I think Atom and others, and Microsoft also has been doing some work on the quantum. So what is different is why this actually became suddenly trendy is because Microsoft has claimed that they have actually created, or they have essentially observed a new um, behavior of the particles, which is based on Majorana particles. So Majorana is essentially a theoretical physicist, Ettore Majorana from, I think, Italy. He actually theorized that there will be a new particle which will be its own anti-particle, right? And that's what the Majorana particle is. It has not been actually achieved. It has not been created yet, but it's a theoretical particle. What Microsoft has done is essentially, again, they have not created it, but they found that many electrons they actually come in a form together and behave like, so it's like a quasi particle, right? It is not exactly a Majorana particle, but it is actually it behaves like a Majorana particle, and it allows this behavior of holding the quantum information. The problem in generally in quantum computing is has been around the error, right? Any charge, any pressure, any temperature, any of these external variables can immediately affect the Majorana part, the quantum qubits, and that's why. So the noise is really difficult, and error correction becomes very important. What Microsoft has achieved with this is that they've developed these particles, the like quasi particle, you can say that based on superconductors, which also achieve superconducting. It allows them to actually make them more stable. And they're using something called a new architecture, which is based on a nanowire, on the end of which they are actually holding these two Majorana particles. Since there is energy gap, it is more stable. The bottom line is it's a new behavior of the particle. It's a quasi particle, not exactly Majorana particle, but it is exhibiting the same behavior. It is more stable. That's a breakthrough, right? Because this new architecture and the quasi particle is allowing more stability, holding it longer, and they are able to now control it. They created this last year. This year, they have actually achieved a breakthrough where they're now able to control it, which now means that now they can actually deploy it for the use. And this is what really the breakthrough is. Because of the architecture of this, it actually is just about 3 microns that nanowire. The architecture is in such a way that this actually allow a really unprecedented scale where basically they can achieve million qubits on a single chip. Some of it is part of the physical qubits, and based on that, then you can also deploy the logical qubits, right? So, but ultimately you can achieve million qubits, which is a lot, by the way. Okay, you don't need actually lots of qubits. Okay, this is not like your classical computing with few qubits. Just 100 qubits is more than enough to do the work of the entire your GPUs available today, right? So it's that kind of a scale. So it's really, really exciting. We will see how soon this can be actually put into the practice, but it's really a great breakthrough.
Yeah, it really seems like it's science fiction come to reality. Like you just said, the ability for just a handful of I can't even say it, topo conductors from the qubits has immense computing power, and if you multiply that by millions on a single chip, I am just going to be astounded at what these things could actually do from a development and computational standpoint. So,
Yeah, I
definitely
think
changing.
I think Jamie, I think just wanted to mention that one of the things is that this is not like replacing the classical computing. Okay, the classical computing will stay. Satya Nadella talked about it as well. I think what it really opens the door is a lot of simulation. Okay, because this kind of computing is required when you want to do a lot of simulation kind of work, right? About the molecules, about the drug discovery, those kind of things require a lot of simulation, right? Which is hard to do currently right now, with all these different periodic table and their elements, and then finding the molecules, which one will hold, which one will interact. That's why this takes a long time, the drug discovery and all those things. And you can only do what you can do. um, but with this kind of simulation, it will, in fact, Satya talked about it, that quantum this breakthrough will actually allow more breakthrough in quantum computing, because you can now do more simulation around the quantum computing. So this will actually enable and accelerate its own discovery further. So that's where, so classical computing will remain, but this one will open actually doors for a lot of new other simulation kind of exercises particularly.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's opening up broader capabilities. You think about the the industries that this can really be used on, and that's stuff like medicine, discovery of new compounds. I mean, yeah, we have foundational models that are being developed now that could help in that reasoning. But if you add quantum computing to it, the speed of which things could actually be created is is just remarkable. So,
True.
all right, let us take us into a slightly different realm for maybe probably what would be a last topic for this episode, and that's around the Azure AI Foundry Labs. So this was announced just a couple of days ago in late February, and the Azure AI Foundry Lab is really a hub for developers, enterprises, startup organizations to leverage groundbreaking innovations that are coming from the Microsoft Research and Development Labs, hence the name Foundry Labs. So the whole idea with the Foundry Lab is to bring the cutting edge research, cutting edge models into the hands of developers to create real world applications. And, it's to basically drive or push the envelope forward in terms of what is possible, whether or not it's solving complex problems or just to share insights and shaping really what is the future for how these AI based models can be used. So I'll do a quick little demo and kind of cruise around, but some of the highlights, there's basically the labs are models that are being put forth. So as an example, there's a model called Muse, which is its first of a kind world and human action model. And again, this is for creating video games where there's interactive visuals and how these models can actually help do prediction based upon controller inputs. That's one example. And again, that's on the gaming side. But outside of gaming, there are new models that relate to building agents like Magentic-1 or models to help predict medical and or proteins. And these are things, whether or not it's Tamgen or MatterSim as an example. And then there's also Project Aurora, which is based upon weather and doing model prediction, leveraging artificial intelligence. So each of these different applications or models are really meant to push the boundaries for what can be done. So I figure it might be better just showing you rather than talking about it. So let me just share out my screen.
Always. Yeah, this AI Foundry Lab, actually, I found it very, very interesting. A lot of, like it's basically like a playground of all these innovations happening. It's amazing, actually. You can play with these things, and before you have to actually really deploy and use them.
Yeah, exactly. So and again, it's really simple to find this page. It's ai.azure.com/labs. And this brings you to the landing page for the lab. So here's again, as an example, the Muse model, various different models like the exact, again, it's for, evaluating different things and patterns within an environment. I talked about Magentic-1 for agents. There's Omni Parser for parsing various different elements of data in terms of visual input. The Aurora model, again, AI-based weather modeling for predicting wave actions or hurricanes for that matter. And then things that look at protein synthesis and or creating new materials. So again, these are AI-based models and kind of dovetail on what we just talked about with quantum computing. Think about where this could ultimately go with quantum computing and something like a MatterSim to identify new objects. But anyway, these are things that could be used today. And let me just show you an example. So if you click on any one of these, it'll take you to a subpage. This is the one on Aurora. Again, remember who I am. I like weather outside of technology. So when I saw this got released, I'm like, wow, let me go check this out, right? So it'll tell you a little bit more about the model. There's, typical a video that'll explain more about it. And this is true for all of these different models. But if you notice, there's the Get Aurora model. What this dumps you into is Foundry. So again, this is the Foundry Labs. Where do these models exist? They exist on Foundry. So much in the same way that we have the model catalog for the 1,800 or so different models that are out there today, these show up as part of that catalog. So what they get deployed as an endpoint. So it's not models as a service. You're actually building an infrastructure. In this case, it will deploy a VM, and then that foundational model is deployed to that virtual machine. An endpoint is created, and then I can then use that. So I actually kicked this off right when this started. So I'm not sure if my deployment is done yet. I'll find out in a second. But so when you actually got a fail, it looks like I probably didn't have enough to deploy this. And let me show you what I mean by that. So this thing needs a pretty beefy machine. So I'm somewhat restricted on what I could actually deploy. But this is 24 cores, a 220 gig RAM machine. So obviously, I don't have enough. I got to bump up some of my quotas. But what this will ultimately do is it'll create that virtual machine and then it installs that model on that. So obviously, I have to go back and actually up my quota. But once you're done with that deployment, then there are a set of samples that could be used. So when you're on that model deployment page, if you notice it's got documentation, full-fledged examples, this is where that takes you out to. So this is the model page itself. It'll tell you about the models, different ways of actually implementing it in the constructs for calling that model. But then there's also a slew of demos, and these are in Python code for being able to use that. And you could see calling out to the models, and through Python, you use Matplotlib and the various different modules for visualization. But basically, the output of this model, at least in terms of the Aurora, will be numerics that can then be used for visualization. So I did go ahead. There's one part of Aurora that it's a model that you don't actually have to deploy. It's basically a pre-trained model that I could just call. So let me just bring up Visual Studio.
This Omni parser is actually very interesting. This is actually something similar to what the computer use from Anthropic and the operator is from OpenAI is based on, right? Essentially taking those screenshots and identifying different areas so that you can take the action. So actually you can build an agent like that using the Omni parser, I think. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah, exactly. And whether or not it's the underpinnings of what Microsoft may implement as far as our computer vision, that those are be things that move forward. Again, remember these things out of labs are research projects, so we'll see where they end up. But yeah, people can start to construct or build their own quote unquote operator you know if you so desire.
Makes sense. I think we have the vision capability in the Copilot also, right? I think Mustafa has talked about it. There is some sort of which is also, I think, part of the Copilot Lab, I believe, that
Yeah.
feature. So it makes
Yep.
sense that this is being open for everybody now.
Yep. Exactly. So I'm not going to go in detail with all this code because it is up on the page that I was just showing you. And again, it'll be there within show notes. But here's a quick start. This will provide, again, based on the Aurora, the weather model. I'm using one of the small pre-trained models that are out there. And this will go through based upon a series of coordinates that I'll send into the model. And this will actually come out with numerics that would be used that I can then pump into other parts. This will take about a minute to run. Trust me, you'll see the numbers come out. I'll just let this kick through, but this is going to go through the model to actually implement that. A little bit more sophisticated one. This is the code itself. And again, this will go out and similar. This is basically one of the examples that will do wave action. So all you really need to do, other than setting up a Python environment, hopefully folks know how to do that. I'm actually set up my own environment for Aurora. I've implemented the various different packages that are needed to do some of this analysis. So I'm using Anaconda in the back end. But one of the main things here, haven't filled it out yet, but you'll notice it's really this point. What's the endpoint, and then the token, which is my key that's being used. So if you deploy the model, this is what you would point back to. This would be my endpoints that I'm running within my VM. So anyway, that's a quick look at the labs and potentially how to use some of this example code.
This is great, Jamie. So I think just a quick question, which I'm sure that other listeners will also have. How does this matter in terms of the cost and the pricing? And I think these models are available actually for us to deploy, as you were showing, on a compute, right? So I think there will be some specific set of or a minimum level of virtual machines that will be required. That is what your cost would be. I believe that there will be no specific cost for playing with these model. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Like if you look back at this, it deploys on a VM. So if I had the available quota, this would cost me $3.67 an hour to run this model. Again, because the model itself is running on the VM, and the VM is what you're really quote unquote getting charged for. You're not getting charged for the model or the inference. You're getting charged for the actual VM.
For the compute. Yep, yep, because these are in the lab. Okay, perfect. This is great, Jimmy, and everybody who's listening. Thank you. This was actually pretty good week. Again, regular week, but so much content to pack.
Yeah, never a loss for things to talk about.
Absolutely. And see you all soon. Bye,
See
everyone.
you.
Bye, Jimmy.